What's the one thing you'd say to your younger self before your first betrayal?
At my dad's retirement party, he lifted his glass again and again. He told stories about my brother's first sale and my sister's big promotion, and even a warm little anecdote about my sister's husband learning to grill without burning the deck. And people laughed and clapped and nodded like we were all inside the same cozy memory, while I stood there with a smile that felt rehearsed because I had worn it for years whenever this exact dance played out, and when he finally set the microphone down. Without saying my name, I understood that he had not forgotten me. He had chosen to skip me, which somehow felt cleaner than an accident, because at least it was honest about the ranking that nobody ever says out loud. I told myself to breathe, to be the adult in a room full of adults who still act like teenagers competing for a seat in the car. And I decided I would not ask for a toast or tug on anyone's sleeve or clear my throat like a sad trombone at the back of a high school auditorium, because begging for crumbs has a way of making you hate yourself later. And I am done doing that in front of people who only notice me when I am convenient. Emily floated over with her perfect hostess voice and told me Dad was just emotional and that I should not take it personally. And then she asked if I could grab the extra napkins from the kitchen because the dessert station looked messy. And something about being handed a chore inside a moment that was supposed to matter to me finally clicked a switch I did not even know I still had. So I said sure with a smile that probably looked normal to everyone except me. Then I stepped aside, lifted my phone, and took a selfie with the banner behind me because if they would not give me space in the room, I would take my space somewhere they could not control. The photo looked fine, not special, just my face and a forced smile and the proof that I had been there even if the program pretended otherwise. And while people circled the cake and Dad hugged another colleague who had flown in just for him, I slipped my purse over my shoulder and told Mom I was heading out to beat the traffic, and she said something about family photos later, and I said to send them to me, which made her blink in that confused way that means she knows something is off, but cannot place it, and I walked out without making a scene because I have learned that quiet exits echo longer than shouting. I sat in my car and looked at the selfie for a long minute, not because I needed approval from a picture, but because I wanted to be sure I was done waiting for someone else to write my part of the story, and when I was sure, I opened the app they all actually read, the one where they perform their lives for friends from church and neighbors who only know us by the front yard, and I started typing slowly, carefully, not with rage, but with that steady kind of focus you get when you are finished asking permission, and I wrote a caption that sounded like a toast I would have given if anyone had handed me the microphone and looked me in the eye. I thanked the people who taught me what to value when you are not the favorite. I thanked the lessons that come from being told to wait your turn while the cake gets sliced and handed to everyone else. I thanked the part of me that kept receipts when everyone swore there was nothing to see, and I said I was proud of the woman I became without a spotlight and without a speech. And I tagged the place because that matters to them, and I tagged my parents because they love tags when they mean praise. And then I placed one neat line at the end that would do the work I needed done without giving away the whole story, a line that said there is a toast I owe myself and I will share it here, with a little note that said attachments included for those who prefer facts over fairy tales. I attached the selfie first because it was simple and it put my face in the center of the thing for once. Then I added a second image that did not look like much unless you knew what you were seeing. A cropped header from an email with a subject line I had sat with for a very long time, and a third image of a calendar reminder that repeated every year with a title that only my family would understand, and a fourth that was a redacted document with just enough visible to make a careful person stop scrolling, and I set the audience to friends and friends of friends, because I was finished hiding the parts that always seem to get lost when the story is told by someone else. My hands did not shake because I was not afraid, I was just tired of pretending, and the tiredness felt like calm once I named it, so I reread every word out loud in my car until the sentences sounded like me and not like a rant, and when they did, I hit post, put the phone face down on the passenger seat, turned the key, and pulled away from the building where they were probably lining up for the group photo that I would not be in, and as the road opened in front of me I knew I had not burned the family or started a war. I had simply told the truth where the truth could not be talked over. I did not check the screen at the first light or the second. I listen to the turn signal and to my own breathing and to the quiet that follows a decision you mean with your whole chest. And by the time I parked outside my apartment, I could feel the notifications buzzing through the seat like a trapped bee, steady and insistent, and I let them pile up because the point of a boundary is that you hold it, you do not chase it. And I went upstairs and poured a glass of water and stared at the cabinet door that still sticks and thought about how many times I have paid the bill and swallowed the apology. Then I turned the phone over and watched the numbers climb. Not in a way that fed me, but in a way that told me people were looking, people were reading, people were connecting the dots even if they were not sure yet which picture they were staring at. And I could see the family group chat lighting up in real time, names jumping like fish, mom using her careful moderator tone, dad sticking to exclamation points and cheerful denial, Mark typing and deleting, and Emily silent for a stretch that told me she was thinking about what those attachments might mean once someone outside the house started asking questions. I did not reply to anyone. I did not edit or explain or soften, because I had already said what I needed to say, and I knew the next sound would not be a comment or a like or a distant relative tagging me in a memory. It would be the sound of a call with a familiar ringtone, the one that always starts with a smooth voice and ends with tears. And I let the last vibration roll across the table while I sat very still and waited for the part one had planned from the moment the microphone skipped my name, which was not an apology and not a fight, just the evidence doing its work in silence until the first person who understood the message could no longer hold it in. The phone started ringing before I set the glass down, and when Emily's name flashed again, I knew this was not a check-in, but a scramble to control the one place she cannot host. So I answered with a steady hello and listened while she spilled a long breathless tangle about my post being reckless, the caption being unfair, the attachments being private, the night being about dad, and the family being humiliated. And when she finally stopped for air, I told her, in the same even tone I use when a door finally stopped sticking, that I had shared a selfie from a family event and a few records that belonged to the story whether we acknowledged them or not, and that the only surprising part was how fast she called, which told me the post had landed exactly where it needed to. She said I had no idea what I was implying, that legal language can be twisted, that people might see crimes where there were none if they did not know the context. And I told her I agreed that context matters, which is precisely why I suggested she put some under the post. One clean sentence, public and clear, acknowledging that I was skipped tonight and acknowledging that support in this family has not been equal. And I said that if the attachments were innocent, then a little sunlight would help everyone breathe, and if they were not innocent, then the problem would not be my caption. And there was a small silence while she weighed which lane to take. She chose the familiar sequence, starting with the soft sister voice that mixes comfort and correction, and uses words like hurt and misunderstanding and dad being emotional. And I told her I was not confused and I was not fragile. I was precise and finished with being edited out, so she pivoted into the manager tone about reputation and brand risk and neighbors who follow everything online. And when that did not move me, she reached for the heavy word defamation, as if dropping a paperweight on a napkin could stop a spill, and I told her that my caption accused no one of anything and that the images spoke for themselves in the way all routine confirmations do when people stop pretending they are invisible. Guilt arrived right on schedule, with a report that mom was shaking and dad was mortified and colleagues were still at the venue whispering about family drama, and I reminded her that I had not raised my voice or begged for a microphone or tugged anyone's sleeve, that I had taken my name back in the only room where they cannot turn down the volume, and that if a plain statement of my own value feels like noise, then maybe the silence they have assigned me was never about manners. And there was another long quiet where I could hear her thinking through the list of levers she has pulled on me since we were children. I told her I would edit the post because I am not unreasonable, that I would remove every attachment and leave only the selfie and the caption if she posted one honest sentence under it tagging dad and me so it could not be smoothed over later. And she called it blackmail while I called it an exchange, which is the language our family speaks most fluently. And when she asked what if she refused, I said I had already added a small line to my caption that said a simple clock, that I would share the full toast at midnight unless someone with a real stake chose to speak first. not to punish anyone, but to end the years of waiting that never lead anywhere except back to my chair at the edge of the room. She said I was obscene for putting a clock on family matters, and I said the clock has been running in me for years while other people received gifts labeled as merit and money labeled as help. And that if a single truthful sentence feels like an explosion, then the foundation is not as honest as it looks. And to make this easy, I offered to write the exact words so there would be no room for spin or slippery phrasing. Then I dictated while I typed so she could hear and see the same thing, a single sentence that said the oversight tonight was real and that our support has not been equal and that we will make it right starting now, followed by a simple instruction to paste it under my post and tag Dad and me. And I promised that the second it appeared, I would remove the attachments and the countdown. For a while I heard only her breathing and the rustle of another voice near her that sounded like Mom trying to coach without being heard. And then Emily said she needed a minute to check something, and I told her to take it because I have waited my whole life and can spare 60 seconds. And the typing bubble began its little on and off dance that tells you a story is being rewritten in real time. And then my phone chimed with a message she clearly had not meant to send, a tight crop of the top of a document with a date line and a subject line and a familiar last name on a line that should not have carried it, which froze the air in the room in a way no threat ever has. She tried to snatch the mistake back with a follow-up message that said to ignore that and another that said we can explain, and I told her I was not promising anything over the phone because the safest place for truth is out where it cannot be edited. And she began to cry again while the family group chat lit up with please and exclamation points and promises to call me in a minute, and I reminded her that the simplest option was still sitting in front of her, that clean sentence under my post. Before midnight, then I ended the call without asking permission, opened my app, pinned a comment that repeated the timing in a voice as calm as a metronome, and finally opened the accidental image all the way, where the header named the document and the owner line named a person, and the name on that line was not hers. When the accidental crop resolved into a clean header and a line that carried my father's full name where my sister should have been, the air in my apartment felt heavy in the way it does when a storm is coming and the dog knows before the forecast. And although I am not the dramatic one in this family, I will admit that I sat very still and let the shape of that line settle inside me, because if there is one thing I have learned from being overlooked, it is that you do not waste a clean fact. By rushing past it while your pulse is still loud, you set it down in the light and let everyone read it at their own speed while you keep breathing in a steady way that makes people wonder how long you have been preparing for this exact minute. I did not upload it, not yet, because the fastest way to lose the room is to dump the whole drawer at once and call it justice. So I went back to the post and added one calm comment that sounded like a neighbor explaining a broken fence, saying that I would remove every attachment and wrap this up if one honest sentence appeared under my caption acknowledging the oversight tonight and the pattern that has lived under our roof for years, and then I waited while the heart icons climbed and the private messages stacked into threads from cousins and old church friends who loved my father and also loved fairness, people who have sat at our table and felt the way a room tilts when Emily speaks and everyone nods like the conversation just landed in a safe place. Mark wrote a message with that careful older brother cadence that pretends to mediate while reinforcing the hierarchy, telling me this was not like me and asking whether I could please think of Mom's blood pressure and Dad's reputation among the men who built their careers alongside him. And I told him that I had thought of all of that for most of my life, and that the caption was not a bomb but a mirror, and mirrors only trouble people who avoid them. Then I posted a second carousel that was not explosive by any legal measure, just a grid of screenshots that show exactly how this family speaks when it wants to be seen. My father's long posts about Mark's first big contract and Emily's glossy promotion with photos from a staged office moment, and even a cheerful paragraph about my brother-in-law learning to make ribs, set beside a neat little comment he left on my doctorate announcement that read "Proud of you, kiddo," with no name and no detail and no follow-up, which the aunties immediately understood because they have entire lives of reading between lines. Mom texted me a paragraph shaped like concern that said I had always been so self-sufficient and that maybe they celebrated me less because I did not need it. And I told her with as much softness as I could find that being capable does not erase the need to be seen, and that withholding attention from the child who does not beg for it is not a compliment, it is laziness in a nice frame. And I let that sit for a minute before I added a third attachment that was not a bank statement or anything invasive. Just a series of calendar reminders created years ago that line up with the family's biggest gifts disguised as emergencies. The tuition that somehow did not exist when I asked for a small bridge loan during graduate school. The dental surgery that was covered for Emily in a way that made me proud of our resources, and then a little hollow when I remembered being told we had to tighten belts the year I postponed a specialist appointment. And I redacted everything that was not the point, leaving only captions that explain themselves. The comments shifted tone because people outside the house know how to read patterns, and the word unfair appeared in friendly voices that would never call my mother a liar and would always hug my father when they see him at the grocery store. And that is the thing about truth when it is finally allowed to sit on the table. It does not need volume to move a room. It needs shape and it needs time, and I watched the replies stack while Emily's typing bubble pulsed on and off like a small emergency beacon that asks for help without saying why it is sinking. I made tea because I needed the ritual and because if I kept staring at the crop I would be tempted to throw it into the fire before the tinder had done its work, and while the kettle clicked I drafted the toast I promised. Not the clinking glass kind, but a steady set of sentences that account for each year we rewrote reality to keep one person comfortable. A toast to the people who do the invisible labor and then get told that the reason nobody thanks them is because they are so good at being invisible, and a toast to the skill of keeping receipts without becoming small and bitter, because bitterness is just grief that never got named, and I am done being a nameless daughter. Dad finally texted me his version of leadership with a line about family, not taking family to court in the public square, and I replied that court is where verdicts live and I am not seeking one, I am seeking a confession that makes repair possible, which is cheaper than any lawyer and kinder than any judge. Then I pinned another comment repeating my bargain and the time, and as the notifications rolled I opened the accidental image again and stared at the owner line that did not carry Emily's name, and I wrote a new sentence under my caption that did not accuse anyone of a crime or threaten a lawsuit. It simply asked a question that every person who knows us could understand without needing a flowchart. A sentence that said we can begin with the truth about who owns the house Emily calls hers, and I pressed post and set the phone down on the counter where the steam from the kettle could not reach it. Because sometimes the kindest way to deliver a reckoning is to let the room read the question in silence and feel their own answer forming before you add anything else. The question I pinned under the post sat there like a calm light in a dark hallway, and within minutes the private messages turned into a steady stream of people who know our family well enough to understand exactly why a single line about ownership could make a room full of adult sweat. So when my phone lit up with Dad's name I answered and listened while he used that smooth professional tone he saves for clients in trouble, the one that sounds generous until you notice it only offers help on the condition that you accept the story he has already chosen, and he told me I had embarrassed him on a night that should have been about legacy and gratitude, that I had confused outsiders by dangling personal paperwork without explanation, and that I needed to take everything down before rumors turned into something nobody could clean up, which might have impressed me when I was a teenager, except I am not a teenager, and I am done calling truth a rumor just because it makes someone important uncomfortable. I told him that if a simple correction under my post appeared with his name on it and with mine, acknowledging that I was skipped tonight and that support has not been equal, I would remove the attachments and close the comments and let the party photos win. And he said he would not be bullied by his own child and that I was playing with legal fire like a child who found matches. And I said the only thing on fire was the gap between what we say and what we do. Then I kept my voice even and reminded him that the sentence costs him nothing compared to what years of silence have cost me, which is not about money, but it is also not about money. And he hung there in a thoughtful pause that might have been progress if he had not followed it with a familiar threat about family reputation that used to make me freeze and now makes me tired. While that call ended without agreement, the comments on my post began to shift in a way that told me the room was reading without being told what to think. Because people who live in this country know how property works and how public records work and how a house celebrated as a daughter's prize can quietly remain in a father's name for tax reasons or control reasons or reasons you only hear once lawyers translate them into soothing words, so I wrote a second comment that did not accuse anyone of a crime or even of a lie. It simply explained how any curious person could check ownership in 3 simple moves. First, by visiting the county assessor site. Second, by searching the parcel or the street. And third, by looking at the owner line and the mailing address field. And I added that this is ordinary information meant for ordinary citizens because transparency is not an attack, it is a civic habit. Then I set my phone down and poured more tea while the shares multiplied on their own. Emily finally posted her counter, a measured paragraph about parents helping children as any parents would, about generosity not requiring a press release, and about a sister who has always marched to her own drum and therefore maybe misses the beat when the family is trying to celebrate, and I took a deep breath and decided to answer without heat. So I screenshotted her paragraph and placed it beside a dated message from Dad written years ago where he declared in plain words that all support would be equal and merit-based and that no one would be favored just because they needed more attention. Then I let that side-by-side stand without commentary because comparisons teach better than lectures when the audience is already paying attention. My favorite aunt called next with a voice full of care that did not demand I become smaller in exchange for it. And she told me she had checked the assessor site herself and that the name on the deed did not match the story we have all been fed at every holiday dinner since the housewarming, and I could hear the sadness in her voice because she loves all of us. And I told her that love is exactly why I am doing this out where it cannot be talked over, that I gave them a simple path to repair. And they can take it at any minute, that midnight is not a threat so much as a boundary that I finally drew in ink instead of in sand. And she said she understood, and that she was proud of me even if the family text thread made her want to lie down for a week. The group chat tried a new tactic by proposing a private meeting tomorrow morning where we could all speak openly and reach a compromise that would protect everyone, and I typed a reply that said openness begins with public truth when the harm has been public for years, and that I was not bargaining for a prize or an apology dinner or a promise to do better next time, that I wanted a single sentence under my post before midnight so the same people who watched me get skipped could watch the adults in the room take responsibility. And then, because revenge only feels clean when it stays precise, I announced that I had scheduled the midnight toast not as a rant, but as an index. A quiet set of pages that show a pattern of transfers that started right after a funeral we all promised to honor. A pattern that moved funds out of the account that had my name on it and into expenses that grew my sister's life, while mine was told to wait another season. Dad called again, and this time he did not sound like a manager or a father or a hero of any kind. He sounded like a man who just realized the story he curated for years had been backed up to a place he cannot reach. And he asked me what exactly would publish at midnight and whether there was still a way to avoid it without anyone losing face, and I told him that nobody needs to lose anything except the need to be right. That all I asked for was one honest sentence in front of the same eyes that watched me disappear from his speech, and that if the sentence appeared the index would vanish and the night would belong to him again, and he exhaled in a way that told me a door had opened somewhere I could not see. Then he said he needed to talk to my mother and to Emily and that he would call me back, and I said he had until the clock turned and not a minute more. Then I hung up and opened the file I had named the toast they skipped, where the first page begins with a letter signed in a careful hand that everyone in this family can recognize without squinting, and where the second page carries a transfer authorization that does not carry my name at all. The countdown moved in a slow, steady line toward midnight while my phone sat face down on the table, and even though my heart wanted to drum out a marching band, I kept my pace on purpose, because clarity needs space. So I checked the scheduled post one more time inside the drafts folder that now held a quiet stack titled like a ceremony program, with the index pages linked and the instructions for anyone who wanted to read public records without pretending those records are a trick, and I told myself out loud that I would keep my word if they kept theirs, because the only way this ends clean is if I treat my boundary like a contract and not a stunt. At 11:30, my mother called with a voice that tried to blend history and guilt into something that could pass for love, telling me that my father had carried this family through lean years, and that tonight should not be the night we pull apart the frame. And I said that love without fairness turns into a stage where one person always stands in the center while the rest hold the lights, and that all I asked for was one plain sentence under my post that names what everyone saw and what I have felt for years, and I kept my voice level because calm makes the shape of a request undeniable in a way anger never can. Then I repeated the exact wording and asked her to read it back to me so there would be no rewrites later that claim confusion where there was none. At 11:45, my brother tried a different path with a text that sounded like compromise, suggesting we do a family statement tomorrow that acknowledges feelings without assigning blame, and I told him that delay is a language I no longer speak, that the people who watched me stand in that room like furniture deserve to watch the repair happen where the harm was made, and that there is no blame in a sentence that simply names the skip and the pattern and a decision to make it right, and while I typed I could see Emily's typing bubble flip on and off, as if she were pumping a brake on a car that has already run the light, which would have been funny if it had not been my life for so long. At 11:54, the sentence appeared under my post from my father's account, and for a second I let the words sit there without touching them, because seeing your own parent write something true in public after years of private fog moves the air in the room. Then I took a screenshot the way you do when you finally get a clean copy of something that has been smudged for years, and I read it aloud to make sure I was not inventing a Kinder version inside my head, a line that said he skipped me tonight, and that support has not been equal, and that we will make it right starting now, with both our names tagged so it could not be tucked behind any curtain, and I felt the smallest unclenching in my chest that did not feel like victory so much as oxygen. I opened my drafts and canceled the midnight index because a deal is a deal, and then I posted the only toast I ever wanted to give, not rage and not a victory lap, but a steady recognition of the work it takes to love a family that forgets you on the program. A toast to the people who keep going without microphones and to the people who learn to hand one over even when it stings, and I wrote that the first step toward making it right would be written down by the adults who made the choices, not by me, which is why the next comment needed to come from my father again, and I watched as a new paragraph appeared where he promised to correct the way the house is described when it is introduced to the world, to settle accounts opened after the funeral we all swore to honor, and to sit with an accountant who is not a friend of the family, which is not a courtroom but is also not a handshake. Emily posted a reply that tried to wrap everything in a ribbon about misunderstanding and timing, and I decided to let the room do its own math, because you do not need to shout when the facts have already pulled their own chairs up to the table. So I wrote one more line that thanked everyone who looked instead of looking away, and I said I would not be answering messages for a while because repair should not be a performance, and because I intend to hold them to their words the same way I held myself to mine, and I left the comments open not because I needed applause, but because sunlight is a habit and I am keeping it. Before I put the phone to sleep, I scrolled to the selfie that started this night, and I looked at my face that had tried to be polite while swallowing another empty plate, and I felt that careful click inside that happens when something finally locks into place. Then I turned off every sound and sat in the quiet while the group chat flared and faded, and I did not block anyone because boundaries do not require disappearance, they require maintenance, and I can maintain this without spending the rest of my life proving that I was right. In the morning this will be messy, and there will be follow-up, and someone will try a side door to rewrite what we all read, but the frame has shifted and the story will never sit the same way again. Because the sentence lives in public and the next steps live in writing, and my own sense of worth no longer lives in a room where I wait to be named, and while a part of me wishes we could have done this years ago, a larger part knows that doing it now means the next time someone lifts a glass in this family, they will understand that a toast is not a favor or a prize, it is a recognition, and I will not beg for recognition ever again, because I already took it. I took it without screaming or smashing anything. I took it by telling the truth where the truth could finally be heard, and for once, that was enough.